All right, let's jump right in, folks. Today we're going deep on a case that'll make you think twice about those "it was just a weather balloon" explanations you hear.
Hmm.
We're going back to the 1970s, to a small village in France called Bluebook, where things took a very strange turn.
You know, this case, they call it the French incident. It really grabs you because of how many people were involved. It's not just some blurry photo or a lone witness. We're talking a whole chain of events that shook this community.
Okay, so imagine this. You've got two brothers, Ari and Claude, right at the center of this UFO whirlwind. And it all kicks off when John Tanner, an American, vanishes, just gone. He was visiting France with his wife, Michelle.
And the details of his disappearance are really what make you go, hold on a second. Michelle's story about this strange light that just enveloped her husband, well, that's just the beginning.
Yeah, we're not talking about some distant lights in the sky, right? This is up-close, detailed stuff, and even physical evidence that's baffled investigators for, well, decades.
And it gets even weirder. A few nights later, John's brother, Claude, disappears too. Almost the same circumstances. Two people, gone, both linked to these strange lights and what some even called a space machine. It's hard to brush that aside.
Like something out of a movie, right? But this was happening in real life, in a quiet French village. And the more you dig into it, the more questions pop up.
Now, what's interesting is the mix of people who get pulled into this case. We have Major Jake Gatlin and Sergeant Harry Fitz from the American Air Force. They're sent over because John Tanner had ties to some important diplomatic things.
Right, high stakes.
And then you have Inspector Marchand. He's a French police officer, experienced guy, and Dubois, an intelligence agent. So you've got military, law enforcement, and intelligence all in this small village.
Each with their own ideas about what's going on, I bet.
Absolutely. Right from the start, there's tension, almost like a competition between the Americans and the French. Different theories, different ways of looking at it, which makes this even more intriguing.
I can only imagine those closed-door conversations. So what did they find at the abduction sites? What made them think this wasn't just a missing persons case?
Well, at the spot where John Tanner vanished, they found some really unusual track marks, not like tire tracks or anything normal. 4 separate marks, not something a typical vehicle would leave.
So not like tank tracks or military stuff.
No, not continuous like that. Separate, almost like big individual pads had pressed down. That ruled out a lot of the simple explanations and really got people talking.
And what about where Claude disappeared? Anything strange there?
At Claude's site, they found evidence of a strong arc light, and there was an electrical outlet nearby.
That's interesting because it points to a possible power source, maybe explaining some of those lights people reported.
Okay, so unusual tracks, signs of a powerful light, and multiple people describing this space machine. The investigators had their work cut out for them. But then, things take an even stranger turn when this local bus driver, Emile Veron, steps forward. Emile's story is a big one. He says he saw both John and Ari getting into this space machine together. Now, this throws everything for a loop because it seems to support the whole UFO abduction idea.
Wait, he saw them both entering this machine? But John was supposed to be abducted, right?
Yeah.
And what about Michelle? Where was she?
That's the million-dollar question. Emile's testimony, while it sounds believable, it opens up a whole new set of questions. Did John go willingly? Was Ari involved somehow? And where does Michelle fit into all of this?
This is where it starts to feel like a puzzle box. Each new piece just creating more questions. Conflicting stories, strange evidence, and who knows what motivations everyone has. The investigators had to unravel it all.
Yeah, this is where the real investigation kicks in. Trying to sift through it all, separate fact from fiction, figure out who might have a reason to lie.
It must have been like a puzzle with half the pieces missing and the other half not even from the same puzzle. Did they start thinking someone was faking it all at this point?
Oh, the idea of a hoax was definitely on the table. I mean, you've got a story this wild, you have to wonder if someone's pulling a fast one.
Yeah, especially with witnesses saying different things and evidence they could point in a bunch of directions. What were the investigators thinking? What were their theories?
Well, keep in mind, we've got investigators from both America and France, and they saw things differently. The Americans, Major Gatlin and Sergeant Fitz, they seemed more open to the idea that something truly strange was happening.
Like they were almost expecting to find proof of aliens.
Well, remember, this was the Cold War, and U.S. was really focused on any potential threat, whether it came from another country or, somewhere else entirely.
Right, can't take any chances. So if the Americans were thinking UFOs, what about the French?
The French investigators, especially Dubois, he was the intelligence agent, they were a lot more skeptical. They were looking for a more down-to-earth explanation, something based on human actions, motivations.
So you've got this clash of cultures, of worldviews, right in the middle of this investigation. Almost like the mystery wasn't just about what happened to John and Claude, but about how different cultures see the unknown.
Exactly. And this clash really shows the difficulty of investigating UFOs in general. You're dealing with things that don't make sense, witnesses who might not be reliable, and a lot of doubt from scientists and the public.
No wonder these cases are so hard to solve. So, how did the investigators deal with all this conflicting information? What were the big moments in the investigation?
A key moment was when the Americans decided to send soil samples and other evidence back to their labs at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That was important because it brought in real science.
Like, okay, enough speculation, let's see what the evidence actually says.
Exactly. And while the lab results didn't say for sure whether there was alien tech involved, it gave them some clues to work with.
What kind of clues? Did they find anything unusual in the soil or the evidence?
The tests showed traces of strange materials, some they couldn't identify right away. That was interesting because it pointed to something out of the ordinary at those sites.
Hold on, they found stuff they couldn't identify. That's a big deal, right?
Definitely. It added to the mystery. Was it some advanced technology, maybe even from aliens? Or could it be something normal, just something the scientists hadn't seen before?
Sounds like every time they thought they were getting close to an answer, they just found more questions. Must have been frustrating.
Oh, frustrating, sure, but also really fascinating. This case had everything: disappearances, strange lights, conflicting stories, evidence pointing every which way. It was a puzzle that needed solving.
So with all this going on, how did they start to figure it out? Was there one clue that cracked the case?
The investigators, both American and French, they were really thorough. They talked to tons of witnesses, looked at every little piece of evidence, and considered every possibility, even the crazy ones. And eventually it was because they worked together, shared information and ideas, that they found the truth.
So it wasn't one genius detective cracking the code, but the whole team working together, slowly figuring it out.
Right. It shows how powerful collaboration can be. Sometimes, to solve a really tough problem, you need people with different skills and perspectives, different ways of thinking.
It makes you realize that even with the unknown, even with something as mind-blowing as UFOs, it's often the simplest things, curiosity, not giving up, and working together that help us find the truth. It sounds like those investigators were dealing with something most of us can't even imagine. But through all of that, there's John Tanner's experience. Even if some details are fuzzy, he definitely ran into something extraordinary.
You're right. No matter how the investigation went, John's story was always there. He insisted he'd seen something incredible, something that just couldn't be explained conventionally.
Like his experience goes beyond all the talk about hoaxes and cover-ups. He really had an encounter with the unknown. You can't just dismiss that.
Exactly, and it's that unknown, that possibility of something truly beyond what we know, that makes this case so interesting. Even with all the evidence, the analysis, there's still mystery. What did John really see that night in France?
And we can't forget the priest who gave John shelter. His perspective adds another layer to this whole thing.
What the priest said is really insightful. He describes John's encounter, however it happened, as a deep, unexplainable touch, something that changes the person forever.
You explain that a bit more. What do you think he meant by that touch?
I think he was talking about how powerful it is to encounter something that totally changes how we understand reality. Whether it's a spiritual thing, a deep connection with nature, or meeting something seemingly alien, those moments can stick with us. They shape what we believe, how we see the world.
So John got a glimpse into something beyond our everyday lives, and it changed him in ways he might not even fully understand.
Exactly. And it's those experiences, those moments with the unknown that keep us fascinated by UFOs and all those things we can't explain. They remind us how much we still don't know about the universe and our place in it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the French incident, what's the takeaway? What can we learn from this case?
Well, I think it shows how important it is to look at UFOs with an open mind. Be willing to see different sides, but also be skeptical. And remember that even when things are uncertain and stories conflict, there can be real encounters with the extraordinary, things that challenge how we understand the world.
It's a story that tells us to keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep searching for the truth, even when it seems impossible to find.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll know exactly what happened in that French field. But until then, it's a fascinating history. It reminds us of the power of the unknown.
I know one thing, I'll never look at a quiet French village the same way again.
Hmm.
Thanks for taking us on this deep dive. It's been quite a journey.
My pleasure. Until next time, keep looking up.